Hi guys, I'm Conor McNulty. We're here today at Souvenir Tattoo Studios in Farnborough. Today I'm going to be teaching you guys how to tattoo in an anime style. I'm going to be tattooing Broly from Dragon Ball Z. Let's go. Okay guys, so we're going to get into actually putting the stencil on now. First thing that I always do is to shave the area. I'm a big fan of butterluck stuff. So what I generally tend to do, apply a bunch of foam to the area, rub that in. This also helps to clean the skin as well. And then give the area a nice shave. You can either shave against the grain or with the grain. I tend to shave with the grain. I find you're less likely to cut people's skin that way. Once that's all done, all the hair's off, what you need to do is actually clean the skin itself, just to get all of the oils, anything like that, any excess dirt, anything that's on the skin, basically get it off. That's gonna help the stencil actually stick to the skin. If it's all oily, it's gonna rub off really easily. If it's dirty, obviously it's an infection risk for your tattoo, so you need to get absolutely everything off. Which stuff, again, you can use a mix of stuff, Dettol, alcohol. I use Butterluck's 2-in-1 prep stuff. Also, it smells very nice. So it's such a small thing that I was taught that whenever you cut out the stencil, I try and cut as close as possible to the actual stencil that you're doing, just so you minimise down on excess paper. Less paper means the stencil is going to go on a bit easier, especially when you've got nice big calves like Paul does. They wrap quite a lot, which means they're going to be quite difficult to get the stencil on. So if you've just got loads of excess paper, it's all going to crinkle and fold, and that's going to fold the design in turn. So that's a handy tip I was taught. When it comes to stenciling as well, some people stencil super rough, some people stencil super quick and just finish on the skin. I am a firm believer that if your stencil's perfect, your tattoo is going to be perfect. So I don't rush my stencils. My stencils are all completely done how I want the actual finished product to look. Same as with placement. If the placement's not perfect, the tattoo's not going to be perfect. So that's something, if you need to move it, if it doesn't look right, if it doesn't flow with the body properly, like you can see on the design, if you can, with Paul's leg, there's a flow mark that goes here. So with the body, flow here, or comes backwards that way, and then you'll see on the design, when I design it flows that way, it actually works with his body. So it's more than just a stamp, it integrates with his body. Stencil stuff, I've been through loads of stuff over the years, actual stencil stuff, there's anchored, loads of stuff that gets sold. It's kind of a personal preference. Personally for me, and a lot of other people that I know, the Butterluck stencil glue seems to be the best stuff that I've ever used. It's incredibly durable, it's very sticky, don't need to use a lot of it, and it's real good for big stencils, because I find with some stuff that's a little bit on the watery side, that you'll press a bit down, and by the time you move down to the bottom, it's started to peel off or move away, whereas the stencil glue holds that in place, so it's super easy. You don't need too much, just a small amount. You kind of want the skin to be tacky, not wet. If you feel it and it doesn't make that tacky noise, you've used too much. So you want to line up exactly with your markers, because again, if the stencil's not perfect, your tattoo's not going to be either. And then sometimes the stencil can shrink in. If you just pull on it, it will go on exactly how the image is meant to sit. I always smooth down the middle first and then do the sides. Again, while simultaneously pulling the stencil so it's actually not crumpling. Once the stencil's dry, what I tend to do is, I help it dry first. So I'll grab a bit of tissue and just smooth it all down, just to get any of the excess stencil stuff off, because otherwise you're going to be sat here waiting for 45 minutes for it to properly dry. As you can see, a lot of it comes off. Same on the other side. More still. And if there's any bits that I want to do to make sure it flows a little bit more with his body, because on an iPad sometimes the image can warp. So this bit, for example, will be coming up, and these bits won't be getting done. Actually work around his pre-existing tattoos. So that's the stencil finish. What I'm going to do now is take you over to my workstation. I'll just talk you through everything that I use and why. The first thing that I have, probably the most important, is my lovely tattoo machine. I use the Aftercare Flux Max. On from that, I usually use Eternal inks. I have, however, been given a Kurosumi anime ink set to try out today, and I'm super excited to try that out. I've heard really nice things about them, so that'll be really cool to try today. As far as my balm or processed butter goes, I use the Butterlux stuff. Again, I love my Butterlux stuff. I cannot endorse that enough. Same as my green soap, Butterlux green soap as well. Smells super nice. I like the Coca-Cola one. Loads of flavors. Obviously, all of my ink caps, needles, stuff like that. I do use like cartridge holders, because otherwise what I can find is, especially a lot of the needles are the same colors, or liners as well, and more specifically, they can just end up all over your station. So it keeps it a bit more organized, just to kind of have them all in line. Liners over here, mags over here, crown shaders, stuff like that as well. Then I've obviously got all the ink caps. I use 2 different blacks, one for lining, one for shading, and then a grey wash. Rinse water for obvious reasons, whenever I need to rinse out my needle. I don't pour out my coloured inks just yet. I will get into that a bit later on. But that's pretty much my entire station. Very simple. I don't like to overcomplicate it. Tissue as well, but that's just it. What we'll do now is actually get into the tattoo. So I tend to work bottom up for my tattoos. Some artists work the other way around. I find that if you work top down, you can smudge your stencil, you can wipe away your stencil, especially because a lot of it, for example, when I'm doing anime pieces, you've got all of these power lines, stuff like that, power orbs, that I don't line into the skin, because it's a more crisp effect if I don't damage the skin by mapping it in with water or bloodline or anything like that. So bottom up is always the best way to go. What I tend to do is line at a backwards angle like that, about 45 degrees, nice and consistent, and then dab the skin. Whenever I tattoo, you can again see the processed butter on my hand. I use as much as possible with that, because it means that I can then work on the skin, and rather than wiping away, I can just dab it, because if the skin's nice and, let's say, wet from the processed balm, then you can just dab the ink and it all just comes off straight away. So you don't have to sit and wipe, so your stencil's going to last longer. So in terms of the cartridges that I align with, I have used so many over the years, and I'm not a one brand fits all kind of person. I use Black Claw for my thicker needles. I use the Killer Ink Stella cartridges for my thinner needles. I've used so many over the years, and these are what I find personally are the most consistent needles that I've ever used. You never really have a faulty one in a box. They hold ink correctly, because some of them just dump ink as soon as you start tattooing. They're by far the best liners that I've used. So voltage varies on skin. It depends on who you're tattooing, what area you're tattooing. There again isn't a one size fits all with voltage. I generally run on about 7.6 when I'm lining. I also use the Flux Max from FK which is a 4.2 stroke anyway, so it's relatively powerful as it is. So you don't need to turn the voltage up higher, because you're just going to damage the skin unnecessarily. But if you're tattooing somewhere, for example a stomach or like an inner thigh, it might be worthwhile turning your voltage down ever so slightly, and slowing your hand speed, just to make sure you don't churn the area. A lot of people decide to go with high voltage because they think it's just going to get it in quicker, but you shouldn't be worried about a low voltage, because you can just match your voltage to your hand speed and you're going to do way less damage to the skin that way. What I tend to do with pulling my lines anyway is you can either push or pull lines. I feel like pulling is when you drag the needle backwards. Some artists tend to prefer to do that. I don't. I feel like it can slice the skin if you're not careful, and then you can just tear the skin open. Pushing is when the cartridge is facing this way and you go that way, and you can push this direction, this direction, this direction. It's good to be able to do it from all directions, because then you can cover all lines. And like I said, keep it at a 45-degree angle. And as long as you line from your shoulder and not from your wrist. So I don't line like this. I line nice and stable, and pull with my shoulder and use your pinky for support, because then you're more than likely able to keep the needle at consistent depth for the whole line. Otherwise, that's how you end up with imperfections. So what you can see, what I'm doing here is just sculpting my lines, my thick and thin ones. In a lot of anime, like I said, it helps to create depth. So it's very important. You can't just put them all over the place and hope for the best. You need to put them in places on the undersides of the fingers, for example, here, then creates the hand comes forwards in front of the face. Whereas if it was just all the same weight thickness, it doesn't quite have that effect. So it's very important to do. Some people choose to go with a very, very thin liner and to then double line and infill. I find sometimes you can damage the skin a bit more that way. What I choose to use is my straight 9 liner from Black Claw, and then I just go around, and if there are small bits, then I might infill that. But just doing it once over means that it's less damage and less trauma for the skin, so it's easier to heal rather than just infilling it. It's kind of a hard style to get into anime. It's very niche. It is getting a lot bigger over the last few years, I think, but a lot of people do it, but not a lot of people do it exceptionally well. There's so many things to it that could take it to the next level. Just like I said, basic things such as composition, how the tattoo sits, flow with the body. In a lot of anime, there's always, especially Dragon Ball Z, there's always so much going on in terms of power levels always increasing and rocks flying around everywhere. So just small stuff like movement lines in the eyes, it adds so much to a tattoo rather than just being a lick and stick. Oh, this is a character, here's his hand. There's just so many small details you can add to it to make it a little bit more than just a character. I think in terms of actually creating the image, it's good to have a likeliness to your character. So obviously finding reference is incredibly important, but at the same time, you don't want to just find the reference, use that picture, trace over it, and that's your tattoo, because A, it's not going to be a custom image, and B, so many other people have done it. If you can find a multitude of references, you might find a hand, even from another character, for example, this hand, you can find that and almost make it into how that character would be. And you need to consider stuff like, so for Broly, emotions, he's filled with rage, stuff like that. He's not going to be a big, nice, happy guy. So you can have facial expressions, you can change, you can look at other characters and see how their facial expressions are. And it's so important to try and keep that likeliness while also creating a custom design, because if you don't create a custom design, you might as well not be tattooing it, because what's the point? But also, if you don't have that likeliness, then you're not creating that character anymore. And if a customer's asked for a set character and they're not getting that, why are you doing it? I mean, another way in terms of reference, something that I tend to do quite a lot of the time is just research. You don't need to look at specific reference, but you might watch a certain episode of a certain character, or they might have a big fight with a certain person, and you can watch that and see what kind of colors are they using, what kind of powers do they have, again, what emotions do they have, how do they talk, what kind of things do they say, just how they are, and you can integrate that into a tattoo, because then you have a deeper understanding of the character that you're actually tattooing. Even if it's an anime that I haven't seen before, I'll always try and watch at least a few episodes that involve that character that are important, so you gain a deeper understanding of that character, and then you can create a better tattoo for the customer. So the easiest way to follow your stencil and to make sure that you're not pulling wonky lines and you're not all over the place is just stability. And for me, the easiest way to be stable, I don't hold the machine. Some people hold it by the cartridge. It's not a pen, it's a tattoo machine. You can hold it by the machine. I get as big a grip as possible. This has got wrap in it, and then a tissue roll, and then more wrap, so it's nice and chunky. So you can hold it almost like a tennis ball. And then at that point, like I said, you just get your pinky, and you stretch the skin, and you can almost stretch it with this hand as well, and you pull lines from your shoulder. So just to give you an example, if I was to pull this line here, lots of cream so I don't rub off my stencil, and then you can pull from your shoulder, not from your wrist, and that way you're just going to keep the machine nice and steady. I'm balancing on my pinky. The needle is going to be in the same depth the whole way. And again, another example of this, again, three-way stretch, 1, 2, 3, skin's nice and tight, resting on my pinky, and then pulling the line from my shoulder, not from my wrist. The machine just stays at the exact same angle the whole time. It's not lifting up and down on the skin, it's at the same depth, and then whip off at the end. So managing depth is pretty much the same as stability with your machine, because if you are leaning on your pinky and you are pulling from your shoulder, the depth comes from you're unstable with the machine. So you're gonna be doing that. That's how you're gonna get lines that are blown out, not in there enough. Whereas if you're stable, if I was to go back on this line and I just move from my shoulder, the depth isn't gonna change. Not only are you stable, but you're also the same depth. So the inks that I tend to use for lining is the Eternal Pitch Black lining ink. I didn't until recently use 2 different inks for lining and for shading, but thanks to Jamie Lee, I went to one of his seminars, learned quite a lot. One of the things I learned there is that I'm sure a lot of artists have noticed when you line and then you pack with the same black, you can kind of get that solid black up to the line and you can still see the differentiation. So by using 2 different blacks, so I use the pitch black for lining, and then for my colour packing, I'll use dynamic triple black, because the triple black is darker than the lining ink. So when you go up to it, it's all just one saturated patch. You don't actually see the lines because you don't want to see the lines. It's always important to make sure your customer's comfortable. If they're more comfortable, they're going to sit better. They have a better experience, they go away being happier. I wouldn't want to just sit in silence for the next 6 hours and he goes away and he hasn't had a great time, and he might have a nice tattoo, but it's more than that. It's about the whole experience. So I said earlier, in terms of not rubbing off your stencil, because obviously it's important, I use a lot of processed butter and then I dab. The reason I do that is if I pull this line here and then dab it, you get that whole line on the tissue, and I haven't wiped away any of my stencil. People that relentlessly wipe, even you can see there, it starts to lighten the stencil and it helps to damage the skin a bit more and irritate the skin, and it just feels terrible. So dabbing, you can do nice and gently. It's cleaner for your tattoo and it's nicer for your customer. So line weight is important to use in anime. Like, you don't want everything to be super thick and super bold, because there are such details like little blood marks on his face or little marks in the rock that can help to just add a boatload more detail to it. Whereas if you all just banged in there in one liner, again, it just kind of becomes flat. Same with, like I said earlier, the thick and the thin liners. So you don't just want to put it all over the place. So I'm not going to put it on details like the eyes or the earrings to an extent, but the hair is such a prominent feature of Broly's face that I'm going to put much thicker marks here than I would do here, because I want this to accentuate over the face, essentially. So I've drawn this design myself. It is a custom design. I feel it's so incredibly important that artists know how to draw fundamentally. If your stencil wipes off and you can't draw, what are you going to be able to do about that? Like, you need to be able to draw. When it comes to doing designs, you can use reference, you can use other tattoos for reference, you can use stills from the actual anime itself as reference, and you can redraw it and you can stylize it so it's not just a carbon copy of whatever you're doing. But it's so important to have that uniqueness to your own design, because fundamentally you don't want to be a photocopier, you want to be a tattoo artist. You're an artist, you're not a copier. So your job is to create and give somebody something that should be custom, that they're happy with. For anyone that's learning to draw, they're in their apprenticeship stage, they're hoping to get an apprenticeship, the only advice is to just draw. Just keep doing it in the evenings when you get some free time. If you work in an office and you're sat at a desk and you're sat there talking on phone calls, drawing your sketchbook, that's what I used to do, not paying attention to my actual job. If you're struggling with certain shapes, for example, if you're struggling with certain faces or Dragon Ball Z faces, you can trace stuff and stylize it. If you've never drawn something before, how are you meant to know how to draw it? If you've never drawn a hand before, how are you meant to know how to draw it? Just you can get a photo of the hand, draw over it, stylize it, start changing fingers and stuff like that. By the time you've drawn 150 of them, it's going to be muscle memory, and you're going to be able to do it without thinking about it. So I've almost finished all of my thicker lines now, and then what I'm going to do is move on to my thinner lines. The reason I do that is because if I was to draw the thin lines, for example here on the face, the lines next to the eyes and stuff like that, by the time I then use a thicker line here, that line might be a little bit too close. So if I was to do my thicker lines first, I can now move that line slightly over this way and just freehand it, and it's going to heal a lot nicer in the long run, because otherwise if they're too close, the tattoo is going to heal, the line ever so slightly spreads and they just merge together. Whereas if I can put it a little bit further away now, the longevity of the tattoo looks a bit nicer. Flow with the body is important, and I think it's something that you need to take into account in the actual design. So in the design process, like I said, you have curve marks that go with the body, back of the knee, and these are followed all throughout the body, onto the bum cheeks, onto the back, your shoulders, your neck. There's always a way that you can make the design flow more smoothly with the shape and contour of the body, and it's so important to do with your actual design rather than just with background or anything like that, with the prominent features, so it frames the body more rather than just being a lick in the stick tattoo, especially when you're doing larger scale work and you're doing stuff like sleeves, back pieces. It always should almost frame your customer, male or female. On the hair, I like to create a lot of jagged lines because again, it can create thicker and thin bits. So, but these would all be on either the starting points, so like there, or here on the curves, here on the curves, just because it creates, especially where in Dragon Ball Z their hair is so spiky and pointy, so it gives it that extra, like almost textured look to it. So what I've done here is just size down. So like I mentioned, I do my biggest liners and then I just literally drop down a size. So I've gone from using a straight 9 black claw down to a tight 9 black claw. And then I'm just going to start working on my smaller stuff, my facial features, stuff like that. At this point, I don't have to work from top to bottom, bottom to top. It's just kind of wherever I want to go. My stencil is going to be dry enough. I'm still dabbing, I'm not wiping. Nothing's going to be going anywhere. So it's just working wherever I need these size liners. So this is what I was saying earlier about doing my thick lines first and then my thin lines, because if I decided to do these first, this then would eventually heal into that. So what I'm going to have to do is move those lines ever so slightly further away. Again, it's one of the reasons that it's important that you are able to draw and able to be flexible with your actual design, because if you're like me, I get carried away on the iPad and draw loads of detail sometimes, and then when it turns out an iPad screen is this big but the tattoo is actually this big, you're going to need to make some changes. So I've sized down needles again. I'm finished with my tight 9 and I've switched over to my tight 7, which is a Stella from Killer Ink themselves. I recently have only just switched to using the Stellas and I actually can't promote them enough. I was working a tattoo convention and I ran out of my Magic Moons, which I usually use, and Joe at Killer Ink gave me a few of the Stellas to try, and I haven't bought another box of other needles since. They're super consistent, super smooth, super sharp. They're, again, not a bad needle in a box ever so far, so I can't rate these needles enough. I use them for my smaller ones, so for my 7 and my tight 5s. I find that with pulling thin lines versus thick lines, with the thick line, I will always pull the line like that, personally, and make sure it's at the same angle, because you can do more damage with a thicker line. There's a lot more needles. When it comes to my thin needles, I'm a bit more lax. For example, like that, you can, because they're a bit sharper, you can move your hands a bit faster and tend to go anyway, push, pull, anything like that. But that comes with experience. That's not just something, because if you just pull a line like this, for example, and you're not experienced, you can just tear the skin. So I've just swapped over to my 5 liner now, and I use a type 5 instead of a type 3, because with the 3 I find the needles can be too sharp, and sometimes they can slice the skin. The cartridges themselves actually don't hold a lot of ink and just dump them all out, whereas with a type 5 they actually hold a lot more ink, and I feel like they heal a lot nicer. They're less likely to blow out because they're not as thin. So a type 5 over a 3 is always my go-to. So what I've done now, I've just cleaned the tattoo down, and in order to get a perfect tattoo, you need to really look at your line work. Sometimes you might not want to, but if you take a good look at your line work and just make sure that there are no inconsistencies, there are no dropouts, and if there are, just go back over stuff. If there's little bits of black, for example, there, that needs to be gone through. So I'll just go back through again nice and gently, because if you don't look at your tattoo long and hard, it's never going to be a perfect tattoo. If I had to give one piece of advice to apprentices or to younger artists, is that you're never done learning. Even when you're at my stage or other artists' stage, there's always somebody that's going to be better than you. You're never fully done. The point that you think you're done learning, you're finished and you're never going to get any better. You should always be a sponge for information. When you meet other artists, ask questions. What needles do they use? How do they line? What techniques do they use? There's stuff that I'm saying here today that might not work for people, and other people have different techniques that work for them. There's so much of tattooing and there isn't a guide to it. So you should always look to learn. So we're done with the lining now, we're now onto the shading. I think the best mags that you can use are quadrant mags. I've been using quadrant mags for absolutely years. You cannot go wrong with a quadrant mag. What I tend to do with my shading and colour packing is move my voltage down, so now I'm running on 7 as opposed to 7.6 when I was lining. Again, this will vary depending on your machine. I tend to only shade slightly as an undertone. For example, here where I'll be putting some brown on the hair, this will just darken it up ever so slightly and then run into the normal brown. In terms of how far you hang a needle out, probably about 2 or 3 millimeters for this. I don't want to be creating a lot of whip shade because I don't want texture in my colour. I just want it to be a darker undertone. So as far as my inks go, I use the dynamic 20 to 80 set. Depending on what I'm going to be doing for my undertones will depend on what tone I'm using. Today I'm going to put it in relatively dark colours kind of places, so I've gone for the 60. So this will just make it ever so slightly dark underneath. With my black, I use the triple black from Dynamic, but there's not going to be overly too much black in this piece. Isn't that right, Paul?
Yes.
So what I'm doing here is whip shading or pepper shading. So you hang the needle out ever so slightly further and you just build it up as I'm moving along and pushing out, but still going back to my starting point, so you get a nice gradient on it, and you just push down and whip up. And as you do that, you get a nice little gradient and you can almost see the needle marks peppered. So in terms of the mags I use, this is a 15 bug pin curved quadrant mag. I don't personally like straights, I prefer to use curved. I feel like they're a lot more versatile and you can get into, rather than me having to swap needles with this tiny little bit of black, you can use the corner and just get into there. Saves you a bit of time. They're a lot more versatile, and I feel like they're a lot just nicer to use. Yeah, I've swapped back to a liner at the moment just because there's a few smaller details that I want to get shaded that the 15 mag isn't quite going to cut. So I'm just stippling some of the under shading quickly just to give it a bit of a darker tone when I actually come to colouring it. This is the same 5 liner that I was using when I was lining. There's no need to get a fresh cartridge out when, because I'm still using black, so it's still just, well, it's still grey wash. So I can just rinse that through if I really need to and then use it. There's no need to get out a new one. If I was going to do something with colour, like some coloured lines, then I would get out a new needle, because otherwise the black would taint the colour. But because I'm still using a shade, it doesn't matter. Once again, just going to give it a quick clean down just so I can make sure there are no flaws or imperfections in what we've done. Cool, so what I'm doing now, I've moved on to my colours. Like I mentioned earlier, I am super excited to be using the new Kirasumi set, but I am also using a few of my favourite Eternals as well. What I'm going to do is I usually start off with, you can see I haven't lined any of this. I'm going to start off with a lot of the lightning marks just because now I'm onto the colour. The more I wipe, I'm eventually going to lose the stencil. So I like to keep it nice and crisp. So this is why I said earlier that I use a curved mag as opposed to a straight, because you can work around. I just wipe that away quickly. You can see there that you can go around with it and it keeps the edge nice and crisp. And then you can just use the side of the mag to almost make a line the whole way up. And then what I'll do from here is just blend it out ever so slightly. As far as my voltage goes, I'm still on 7 volts, the same as I was when I colour packed. I have got quite a powerful machine, so it doesn't need to be high. You can just use your hand speed and the motion of the needle. So what I'm doing here, like I said, is just giving that lightning kind of bit some shape, following that round. And once I've given it a solid edge, I can just blend out so it's almost like a glow underneath what we're doing. There are a few colours that a lot of tattoo artists don't like to use. Like, I personally don't like green. I don't like purple. Really hate purple. Because a lot of the time what can happen, especially with purple, is that it doesn't look fully packed until you just leave it. You just have to leave it to settle. But what a lot of people can do is it won't look packed, so you overwork it and you overwork it and you overwork it, and then it scars and it just looks horrible. So you just have to pack colours the same way as you would a simple colour. For example, a red or a golden yellow. Just pack it the exact same way, do it once, leave it. Once it's settled out, if you need to touch it up, you can touch it up. But at least that way you know you're not gonna overwork the skin. You'd much rather underwork it than overwork it, because you can always fix it. So this is why I was saying it's so important to be able to draw. By the time that I actually come to tattoo this design, I've drawn this design 3 or 4 times. I've sketched it, I've gone over in a finer sketch, I've then stenciled it, I've lined it all out. So I should know theoretically where most of it goes. I also have my reference as well. It doesn't have to be bang on like if you've lost your stencil, but as long as you have the rough idea. Like, this is my drawing, so I can kind of freehand stuff and just make sure that it's still going to look fine. But as long as you don't panic, it's your drawing. You can do what you want with it. With some colours, like I was saying, some yellows, a lot of purples, some greens, if you just give it a once over, because of the texture of the skin, and like the way some bits might bleed more than others, this patch here might be darker than this patch, but give it 30 minutes and this will settle out and it's all the solid one colour. But it's easy to look at that dark patch and then try and overwork the other patches. So if you're ever unsure on anything to do with colour, just leave it and come back to it. It's so simple to just fix. rather than you can't undo it once you've scarred it. When I colour pack to make sure it's completely saturated is that when you have your needle marks essentially going like that, what you want to do is come back from another direction. So then if your needle marks initially go like this, they'll go like that, and it's easier to get a much more solid colour. I find if you go in circles, then if you go like that, there's too many gaps in what you're doing. Sometimes if it's a super tight area, for example like the corner there, I might go in little circles just to kind of get into it. But generally if you're trying to pack a big area, you're better off cross hatching because you're going to cover more. If you go in circles, you have to go forwards, and if you think you're going to push forwards that whole time with circles, and there's going to be so many gaps, and then you have to go back and you should circle the other way. So it's just much easier to just cross hatch. The one thing I always try and do whenever I'm tattooing is do all the boring bits first. So the backgroundy stuff, the lightning bits. Everyone wants to go straight onto the face. The face is the coolest part, but what I find and what I learned that if I do the coolest bits first, you can subconsciously rush the background. Whereas if as soon as I get onto the colour, I just start by doing the bits that are going to be done at the end, then I'm going to put a lot more effort into it, and then I get to do the cool bits afterwards. It's like a reward.
It's like a reward.
So I don't clean it all the time because I'm trying to avoid irritation to the skin, which sounds silly to say that cleaning it can irritate the skin, but it can. So I try and avoid cleaning as much as possible. I'm also relatively confident in my ability to colour pack, so as I'm going through, I don't need to clean it down just to make sure that it is solid. If I really need to do that, I can wait till I've done all of this, and then I can do that at the end, and then go back through with the second pass if I need to. But the more I sit here and white pull, the more it's going to start to get sore and irritated and hurt him, so if I can avoid that, I will. Here I'll wipe away from the green because obviously this colour is a little bit too dark to be wiping into this, so if I contain the two, this might end up with a slight pinky hue. So in terms of blending colours, what I try to do is you want those needle marks. So if I start here and then whip out, I just wipe down just to show you. You can see it's solid and then blend it out into the needle marks. If you push that out, your blend can either be as loose or as tight as you want it to be. If it's in further, the blend's going to be a bit smaller. If you blend out further, then the blend is obviously going to be a bit smoother. And then just clean off my needle, go back into it from that way and do the same thing and whip out, and then it blends like that. And then I can just go back through from this end now. Yeah, that kerosene colour is actually really nice. I really like that, and it goes in super easily, which is nice because it's kind of a purpley tone, which I really hate purple colours. So the bit I'm going to do now is going to be like the red fingertips and the red in the eye, because red's got a very, very strong pigment. Generally I want to get that colour out of the way as soon as I can, just because otherwise when I start to do lighter tones, if I haven't done the red and I then choose to do it, I might taint that colour. Like I said, you don't need to smash the colour in, you can. I just kind of let the machine do it. I keep the machine upright at a 45-ish degree angle and push the machine forwards, and it just goes in super easily. One little tip you can always do if you're not ever sure if any colour is packed, even for black it works, just pour a load of green soap just all over it completely, and it acts as like a magnifying barrier. So if there's any like inconsistencies, you'll see them very easily. So earlier when I talked about my workstation, I had none of my inks poured out other than my blacks and my grey washes. I tend to not pour out any of my colour inks until I actually get onto the colour inks, because you don't know how long it's going to take. Somebody might not be having the best time, you might have a lot of breaks, they might not have great skin, and coloured inks can tend to dry up or go a bit crusty and thick. Whereas if you wait until you're actually on the colour before pouring them out, then they'll all be nice and runny. So I use the Flux Max Ultra. The reason I use this is because it's got a 4.5 adjustable stroke. So the machine hits relatively hard. So when it comes to colour packing, I can run the voltage relatively low and it still gets in nice and easy. Same with the line work. I don't have to push the lines. I don't have to try and damage the skin. The machine will just be able to get it in easy. One drawback of this is that if you are a bit heavy-handed, then you need to be more careful, because you are able to cause a lot more damage to the skin, so it's not a recommendation for everyone if you're not capable of being gentle. The stroke is essentially just how hard the machine is capable of hitting. So it's how far the needle winds back before going back into the skin. So if you've got a longer stroke, it hits harder. So if you do black and grey realism, for example, you want a machine with something like a 3.5 stroke, because that's going to be nice and gentle, very good for like soft shading. An all-rounder is usually about a 4 stroke. That's good for colour packing, lining, black and grey shading, because then it's kind of in between everything. So this is what I was saying earlier about various different brands of inks. Some are super thick, some are quite thin. I personally prefer a thin ink. This is very watery, so it just goes into the skin easy, whereas when you've got a thick one, you need to dip every 3 seconds and it can come out a bit patchy. And I prefer a watery ink, and that's what this is. It's very nice. I don't generally use round shaders for lining. I used to, but what I found was that if you use a round shader for lining, over time when the line heals, it appears more furry. The lines seem to spread a little bit more, so I tend to avoid using round shaders for lining. So I tend to use quite a few of the same colours when I'm tattooing. Big bold yellows, golden yellows, bright blues, baby blues, a lot of reds, obviously the skin tones as well. I feel like over the years I've tried so many different inks that these have kind of become a staple in my ink diet, so to speak, just because I know they go into the skin easy, I know they're good colours, and I know they heal well, so I just tend to use them. So I always try and do a light source close-ish to last. I try and get my general sketch done first, getting any bits of colour or contrast, shadows and stuff in first, and then pick where I want my light source to be. So for example, from here it would be the hand. He's got his like ball energy in his hand, so the light source would be coming from here. So then any and all bits of light would be from underneath. So here on his chin, underneath his eyes, underneath his hair. If I pick the light source to be up in the back of the knee, for example, then it would be coming down. It's always much easier to pick where you want. If you had a circle and you decided where you put that light source, and then just draw a complete line out from it, that's where all of your light sources are going to be. With anime, you can kind of bend the rules a little bit, but understanding anatomy to a certain extent, and where shadows would be, and where darker bits of skin would be, and where you would have dips and ripples in muscles and stuff like that, is always a part that plays into it. If I could speak to myself as a younger artist, I'd say definitely practice more, because not that I haven't enjoyed this, but I would like to be further than I am. I think if I practiced more and understood more when I was younger, then I could be a lot further than I am now. As in, when I say further, I could just have a bit more of an understanding than I already do. You can always improve your drawing. I could be better at drawing. There's some artists who they've been tattooing for 2 or 3 years and they're just absolutely incredible, and that is something I would advise everyone to do, is to just put everything you can into what you've got when you're an apprentice, because it only benefits you. One piece of advice that's always stuck with me was you're only as good as the last tattoo that you let walk out the door. So no matter how good you are, you should put everything that you can into every tattoo that you do, because all it takes is one really bad tattoo to leave the shop and then you have a bad reputation. You should always try and do as much as you can for every customer. The only way I would say to kind of discover your own style is just through rinse and repeat drawing, and find other artists that you like what their stuff looks like, and don't replicate it, but almost do it in your own way. You might like it, you might hate it, and if you like it, eventually you can get to a point where you don't need to look at anyone's reference or anyone's stuff. It is going to be your own style. Just repetition is the only way you're going to be able to develop a style. If you're not drawing, you're not going to develop anything. So another way of colour packing when I do big open areas like this is almost to consider the machine like a lawnmower, and you just go back and forwards, especially with the curved mag. So you tilt it to the left, tilt it to the right, tilt it to the left, and just go back and forwards. And it's nice and solid. I don't really like using the skin tone. I prefer to completely saturate the skin. Some people do use the skin tone, some people don't. I just prefer my work to be fully saturated, and that is just a personal preference. It's okay to do either. But yeah, I like to fully saturate mine. Skin tones change, people get tans. There's so much that can happen. Don't really play with negative space either, just because, yeah, I like it to be completely saturated, so I don't really mess around with negative space too much. But I know some artists that do, and it's super cool. It's just not a bit of me personally. A lot of anime has influenced me to kind of push me towards doing this. So I've always been a weeb growing up. I've loved anime for years, and I love drawing anime. I always have done. So now that I have the chance to tattoo it, and it's actually kind of taken off a bit, and people are willing to get, just in my opinion, what is just my doodles on them, I would like to kind of take that as far as I can and try the best I can. So then watching more anime, you get to see wicked fights, wicked like characters, and then you just kind of want to tattoo them and stuff. So I swapped over to do the white now. The main reason I'm doing the white is because I'm working down towards the bottom half. I'm not going to be coming back here. There's no danger of me wiping any ink into anything. So it just means that the white ink has got more time to settle out before the end of the day, so then it'll look better in photos and fresh. So I'm at the point now where I'm almost finished the hair. I'm just going through and doing kind of little bits of detail, and then what I'm going to do is, once the hair's done, I've got a few minor details to do, and then like I said earlier, it's just going to be a case of cleaning it down and going through and really inspecting the tattoo to make sure that everything I've done is as solid as I want it, is as blended as I want it, the line work's as solid as I want it as well. Just make sure that it's kind of what I want it to look like. So the only reason I'm standing up now is just to make sure that I can hit the right angles from where I need to with the tattoo. Like, if I'm sat down and at the moment I'm trying to reach forwards towards his inner calf, I'll be too far over. I like to come from certain angles with my needle, especially when I'm colour packing. Just makes my life a bit easier. It's not great for your back, but it's perfect for a better tattoo. An easy way to stay within the lines is just practice, unfortunately. Like, you can hang your needle out a little bit further and kind of work off of, like, before you start tattooing, you can just about feel the needles hit the skin and you will see some needle marks. So if you're slow, you know exactly where you're going to be. And then over time, like, I love personally a 15 mag from Quadrant is my favourite mag. If I had to use one mag for the rest of my life, it would absolutely be Quadrant 15 mag. They're so incredibly versatile. You can do anything with it, and I use them so often. So just through rinse and repeat, I know exactly where this needle is going to be. Somebody's going to say at some point, Broly doesn't have an X on his face. Yes, I know Broly doesn't have an X on his face. That is something that I like to include in all of my designs, almost as kind of a signature, I suppose. It's just something I like to do. If the space permits it, I like to sometimes mess with the characters, put tattoos on them, give them script on their face, just something so it isn't just a bog standard carbon copy of that character. That's what I like to do. On my design, I have the green eyes into the red, and on here I've got white into the red. That is purely a design change on today. I didn't really like the green in his eyes. I feel like it kind of merged too much with the design. I wanted his eyes to stand out. Like, if anyone knows Dragon Ball Z and knows Broly, his eyes are such a crazy feature of his that I really wanted them to stand out. So colouring them white was the way to do that. What I'm going to do now is just clean the actual tattoo down, take a good look through it all, make sure that it's all, again, saturated, solid, make sure I haven't missed out any bits. Before I say done, I have a nasty habit of saying done and going back into it, and it feels mean when you do that. So the plan is now, give your leg a nice little wipe down. Once I've wiped it down, I'm going to absolutely drench your leg in my process butter just to help it settle out a bit faster. It's going to help take some of the redness and the soreness out of it as well. And then once that's done, we can get some lovely photos, talk you through Aftercare, and you're done. Cool. So for Aftercare, as you've noticed, I use puppy pads. Controversial take, they're literally the same as some name branded pads that you can buy for a fraction of the price. Essentially what it does is, I'll put this one on you now. All the gunk and stuff that comes out of your tattoo overnight just gets soaked up straight into the pad. What we do is we dry heal it. So I'm going to put a pad on you now, leave that on till tomorrow morning. Tomorrow morning when you wake up, get in the shower, take it off obviously, you're going to see the tattoo printed onto the pad. You'll know it when you see it. Just give it a good wash, warm soapy water, let it air dry. Don't use a towel because towels have got bacteria on. This is one giant cut on your leg. After about 10-15 minutes when it's dry, put another pad on. I'll give you one to take home tonight. Just go swing by Tesco's, Amazon, anywhere like that, just buy some more. But I'll give you one for tomorrow. Put the other pad on tomorrow morning, leave that one on till night time, rinse and repeat from there on. Change it at night time, in the morning, change it again, night time, change it again. Every time you change it, the print of the tattoo is going to be less and less. By the time you take the pad off after probably about 4 or 5 days and it looks just like that, nothing on it, that means the wound is completely closed. At that point, just keep it clean. Still don't cream it for about another 2 days. When it's looking mega dry, then start creaming it. Only just a thin layer. You wouldn't absolutely cake your face with moisturizer. Don't do it to your tattoo, you'll just suffocate it. But just let it be dry. It's not the worst thing in the world for it. So to put these on is you go around nice and tight at the top. If I can actually find the tape. There we go. Then nice and tight at the bottom. Oh, I'm going to put one more bit on you as well. If you do have any questions about Aftercare, by the way, Paul, or if it's all just gone in one ear out the other because it's been a long day of tattooing and it might be a new way of looking after it for you, please do just message me. If I don't reply, please do just spam me. I'm more than happy to talk you through it, but it is relatively simple. Just long and short of it is change it morning and night. Super simple. Don't put any cream on it. It's very straightforward. Cool, and you look super fashionable. And that's the tattoo done, guys. So I hope you guys learned something today. If you do have any more questions or you just want to see more of my work, my Instagram handle is @Colin_Tattoos. If you do want to message me, feel free to do so. Be sure to like and subscribe to Killer Ink on YouTube as well.